The Vietnam War and Public Opinion. In 1954, when the Vietnam War began, the conflict between the Northern Vietnamese, Viet Minh, and the Southern Vietnamese, Viet Cong, gained much more exposure in the media. As we said before, the Vietnam War is known as the first televised war in American history. It is often referred to as the Cold War in East Asia. This conflict generated a lot of human interest. Videos and images of combat missions featured soldiers in arms, were made public to the American people and released without discretion, while newspapers reported a large number of casualties. Of course, the population was allowed to see with their own eyes what was going on in Vietnam, rather than just being told of the events from biased incumbents like Johnson and his administration, who wanted to sell the war to the American people. By the same token, that was why most people preferred the television news over newspapers and other sources, because it provided the American people with an alternative perspective. However, journalists had to refrain from reporting some types of information that might jeopardize airstrikes or search and destroy missions that were in progress or might otherwise endanger the lives of Americans in uniform. The underlying conflict between North and South Vietnam was political. Half of the country, the North or Viet Minh, was ruled by the communist leader Ho Chi Minh, and the southern half ruled by the non-communist leader Ngo Dinh Diem. President L.B.J. stationed American troops in the southern half of Vietnam, Viet Cong, to aid them and prevent the northern Viet Minh from taking over. Unfortunately, the United States' efforts to stop the atrocities were futile, which in part is because the U.S. did not send ground troops into the north of Vietnam. The U.S. wanted to keep fighting in the south of Vietnam while sending airstrikes to hit the Viet Minh. Consequently, American troops stayed in the Viet Cong area. This, however, did not restrict trade between the north and south or stop communism from spreading. The Vietnam War lasted from 1955 to 1975. By 1965, more than 500,000 Americans were serving in Vietnam. Many Americans did not approve of the war, and the government was getting a lot of pressure from the public, who grew with anti-war sentiments. In fact, in 1967, a Gallup poll released in mid-June revealed that half the American people said they lacked a clear idea of what the war is about. Presumably, the Gallup poll was targeting a vast majority of people who were unaware of the reason behind our involvement in this conflict, albeit a general public. Under those circumstances, the general public and attentive public alike depended on the news, or the elite, to inform them of the situation at hand, which was, of course, the Vietnam War. For instance, CBS ran a sensational story by correspondent Morley Safer, a routine search and destroy mission in the village of Cam Ranh on the 3rd of August, 1965. It became a controversial event because Safer and his crew filmed U.S. Marines using a cigarette lighter and a flamethrower to burn thatched huts. 150 homes were leveled in retaliation for a burst of gunfire, Safer asserted. It will take more than presidential promises to persuade a South Vietnamese peasant that we are on his side. This story angered President L.B.J., who felt that the media was out to get him and his administration. As a matter of fact, President L.B.J. was so upset that he made a telephone call one morning to the network president of CBS, Frank Stanton, to ask him, "Are you trying to f*** me?" By and large, this criticism was not well received, and President L.B.J. even alleged that the reporter, Safer, was a communist. In the end, all that was proved was that Safer was only Canadian. President L.B.J. did not seek re-election, and it was not until President Nixon that troops were pulled out of Vietnam. Many veterans came back wounded as a result of the war, while others never came back. Irrefutable evidence of the atrocities in Vietnam, such as combat missions, airstrikes, American casualties, and merciless U.S. retaliation, was seen on TV intended to show the public what really happened. Back home, Americans were starting to see what was going on, and most started to resent the war. This emotional upheaval incited many protests and provoked incidents on the streets. often ending in violent fistfights.